my friends are simps.
Today's video begins with a sad story. Earlier on today, I was so excited to share with you this video on the Donner B1, then my haste to upload it to YouTube so that I could bask in the warm glow of your wonderful comments and undulating praise that round a wee bit too quickly in my chair and inadvertently sent my external hard disk flying into the air. Now, it hit the ground with such force that is split into a million different pieces, and unfortunately, as a consequence, I've lost something like a year and a half's worth of footage. Now, at this difficult time, I would appreciate it if down below in the comments you didn't ask me questions such as, Stephen, why did you not have any backups? Or, how did you manage to salvage the original unboxing footage? Because obviously I wouldn't lie to you, and this is definitely the first time I have opened this box. Either way, I'm sure you've probably already seen the Donner B1 getting unboxed a million times and a bunch of other YouTube videos because there's loads of them out there. But if you're not familiar with this thing, it is a TB303 clone and the first analog synthesizer to come from the company Donner. In fact, it's the first synthesizer they've made, full stop. Now, for those of you that are not acquainted with the Roland TB303, luckily enough, I am not just here to act as a cautionary tale, but also to inspire and educate. So I'll give you a quick rundown. The original TB303 came out in 1981, so it's much older than I am. However, unlike myself, when it was first released, it was a massive commercial failure. Part of the reason for that, I think, is that Roland designed it to be a bass guitar synthesizer, as in to sound like an original bass guitar stringed instrument, which it obviously doesn't. But also, nobody really wants to have a real bass guitarist in their band, never mind a synthesized version, so I can understand why it was a flop. Anyway, the 303 went on to find its place in sonic history as the infamously squelchy trademark sound of acid music. Now, my fellow psychedelic wanderers will probably in particular recognise it, even if they don't know what the synth itself is. However, I think most people will probably know the sound a wee bit, because everybody from Daft Punk to Calvin Harris and even that ginger prick Ed Sheeran has probably at some point in his life used a 303 in their music. Now, obviously, there's a whole bunch of different TB303 clones available out there now, from the rather expensive and boutique options down to the more affordable end of the spectrum, and that is where the B1 sits. I have to be honest and say I wasn't in a massive rush to check out the B1 originally, because I've already got another TB303 clone that I barely use. However, curiosity got the better of me, and Donner agreed to sponsor this video so that I could put some money towards a new hard drive. So if you think about it, everybody wins, but mostly me. In fact, not me at all, because I've lost all of my videos. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. I've been fairly surprised to see a bunch of synth YouTubers saying that they've never heard of Donner before. As a guitarist, I am well aware of them because for a long time they've been making affordable mini guitar effects pedals and power supplies and all that kind of stuff, so it's not as if they've come out of the blue. They have been doing this kind of thing for a while. Obviously, I am just the most knowledgeable and trustworthy person to follow on YouTube, so congratulations on watching this video. You've made a wise choice. There's been a recent firmware update for the B1 which not only fixes a bunch of bugs and stuff like that, but also introduces song mode. Now, I never really understood why people cared about this so much, but it's actually really useful because it means you can chain together patterns to get much longer sequences. So rather than being stuck with a single pattern of 16 steps, you can chain together 16 patterns to get 16 times 16. I'm not going to do the maths, I'm sure you can work it out. It gives you much more much more patternage, which is good. So when it comes to the design of this thing, Donner have obviously shied away from the original style of the original TB303, which is quite interesting because a lot of the clones follow that same kind of model. Instead, they've gone for a more streamlined, modern look, and that is something that you're either going to like or not like. The design kind of reminds me of a Logitech K811 keyboard, which might sound like a criticism, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually quite like that keyboard. It's just quite a different look for synth gear. It's not something that I've ever really seen from any other manufacturer. Now, one thing that is quite nice about the design is that in contrast to the wee clicky, plasticky keys that the original had, and which a lot of the other clones have followed with, B1 has got these large backlit silicone pads, which are actually not just really nice to play, but they also give you some feedback when you're playing in terms of visual feedback. And it isn't just that you've struck a pad, but they do actually let you select different things in different modes. So it's a nice feature. It's been nicely implemented. In addition to the pads, we've also got a bunch of buttons gathered over on the right-hand side of the synth, in a kind of odd calculator numpad style, which is also adorned with a digital display. Now, this is actually a really great addition because it makes the synth much easier to operate, especially if you want to find a particular BPM, something that was always a bit of a nightmare to do in the older versions. This way you just punch it in and you know exactly what the BPM is, and it's so much more straightforward. Now, you'll note that the synthesizer is angled, so it is higher at the rear. This, I guess, makes it easier to operate on a desktop and probably is more ergonomic or something. I don't know. I'm not the kind of person that's, you know, an occupational therapist or whatever. I tend to just make music lying on my couch, scrunched up like a pretzel. So don't take my word for it, but just be aware that it has got that wee angle at the end. Now, the B1, much like the original TB303, is made of plastic. This means it is very lightweight and, you know, you can carry it about without it becoming a burden. However, you do have to be careful with it and not fling it off your desk, much like I did with my external hard disk, because as we've seen, damage can occur even with the lightest of drops. So on the rear, we've got an on-off switch. There's a 9V DC barrel jack power connection. There's a USB-C connection, which I believe is for MIDI transfer only. Don't try power the B1 over this port and then blame me when it blows up. Then we've got two full-sized MIDI DIN jack connections for input and output. Hallelujah, no mini jacks here. Thank you, God, and also Donner. Finally, audio output is mono and it's on a 1/4 inch jack. So that's the one that looks like a guitar cable because, well, it's the same. Now, I don't want to just duplicate all of the other videos that are out there on YouTube and, you know, read out a big list of the technical specs that you could go look up online. So instead, what I'm going to do is give you a very basic overview of the synth's features and then tell you, more importantly, what I think about it, because ultimately, that's really what you're here for anyway, isn't it? My insight and knowledge. Now, the basics are that we've got 16 steps per pattern, which are represented by the pads that run along the middle of the B1. There are 128 different patterns that can be saved and selected using the pads on the right hand side. Again, this is where the display comes in very handy. As I mentioned, you can chain these up together in the new song mode. One cool thing is that once you've created or loaded a pattern, you can transpose it chromatically using the pads in the middle, which is actually pretty smart and enjoyable to play about with. Now, one thing that you may wish to know about is that there is an app, a piece of software that you can run on a personal computer, which lets you edit patterns and also parameters like MIDI through and velocity sensitivity and all of that stuff. This is handy if you are using the B1 connected to your computer a lot, but also is probably fairly useful to access certain parameters like MIDI channel if you don't remember the shortcode that you have to press when you boot the thing up. It's fine, but it can be a wee bit fiddly, so it's nice to have this option as well. Now, because song mode is so new, it wasn't in the manual that I got. However, to activate it, you double press the pattern key, and then you can assign different patterns to each of the individual pads, or at least the pads that correspond to the white keys of a keyboard on the Donner B1. Now, in addition to this, there are two specific modes that you should probably know about. The first allows you to harmonise the tempo across the patterns, because obviously each individual pattern has its own tempo, and if you play them one after the other and don't harmonise them, then you might have one really fast one and one really slow one, and that might be cool, but it also might not be what you want. So you have to enable that by pressing, I think, the G sharp key, but don't quote me on that. My music theory is terrible. The other mode that you should be aware of is the B flat key, I think. And if you press this, it will allow the chain to play in sequence. If you don't have this enabled, the pattern that you have selected will just play over and over. And this allows you to choose quickly from between 16 patterns, so it can be quite cool to perform with that. But if you want them to play like a song, you need to make sure B flat is also enabled. See? Wouldn't find that in any other YouTube videos, would you? Now, the TB303 is a classic synthesizer that has got a very specific sound, and if you're looking for a versatile instrument that can do pads and, you know, all sorts of things, then this is probably almost certainly not the thing that you should be looking at. Instead, this synthesizer provides that particular timbre that's got a real nice textural quality to it, one that just tickles the brain in a particular way, especially when you're in a psychedelic fugue. So I've been told, anyway. Now, this is one synthesizer in particular where hardware is always going to be better than a VST because the filter gives it that characteristic sound, and playing about with it on the fly is one of the best things about it. Because of this, the B1 and other 303 clones are particularly cool because they allow you the chance to play about with that classic sound without having to spend $4 or whatever it is that the 303s are going for now. Am I ever likely to buy an original 303? Fuck no. But would I buy a number of 303 clones to play about with for $100 each? Probably. Now, being serious, I have actually really enjoyed playing about with the 303. It kind of speaks to my cosmic sensibilities and sounds wonderfully gritty, particularly when you stick on the overdrive and get the filter resonance just right. The built-in delay is actually also really cool as well, in an unexpected way, because it adds a bit of body to the sound, particularly when you get up into the wee weedy thin parts of the filtered sound, if that makes sense. Now, of course, you don't need to use the built-in effects with the B1. You can also run it through some outboard gear, and it seemed like the perfect excuse when recording this video to crack out my old Cosmo modular and run it through some old tube overdrive and a nasty, dirty filter for some extra grit. What's especially annoying is that I've had to do this twice, because I'm a professional. If your main concern is to find a completely faithful reproduction of the original 303, then the B1 might not be the clone that you're looking for. However, for me, it is so much easier to understand than the original. The 303 and also the clones that then followed its idiosyncratic workflow have got an infamously difficult and obtuse way of going about things, to the extent that whenever I pick up my particular Behringer TD3 and go to write music with it, I just can't be bothered figuring it out, and I look at it and go, ah yeah, I forgot this was how it was. And I know that might make me a completely pathetic individual, but it is the reality. In contrast, I find the B1 fantastically easy to use. You effectively just choose the step of the pattern that you want whilst you're in record mode. You select the various parameters, so picking the note, picking whether or not you want a slide or a hold or a ratchet on that particular step. And that's it. It's as straightforward as that. Even if you don't read the manual, which obviously I definitely did. Now, whilst there's a lot of things about the B1 that I like, one thing that I think could be improved on, and which Starsky Carr also picked up on actually in his video, is the placement of certain key function buttons. So for example, the play, stop, and also record buttons, I think, are hidden away in the calculator style numpad on the right, and I need simplicity for my smooth brain, and I would have preferred nice big chunky buttons placed on the top somewhere so that I could quickly and easily identify them whilst you're in the flow of things. But, you know, hey, that's not a big deal. I'm sure you are less idiotic than I, with much nicer, slender fingers. At the point of release, the B1 was something like 180 Great British pounds or thereabouts, but lately it's been sitting at about 90, which means it's very much in the same ballpark as the Behringer TD3, but with a much simpler approach. So if you're looking for an updated workflow that is a bit easier to wrap your head around, then this might be worth looking at. Did you enjoy my sponsored video today? Will you be buying a B1 synthesizer to make acid music with? Will you be subscribing? I didn't think so.